Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Tiffany, a retired librarian turned homeschool mom. And in this video we're going to look at Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So I'm not going to go in depth with this. A lot of people already have. I don't have a lit minor, so I haven't studied this academically. So this is just essentially my opinion and how I think it works with kids. I admit I find this book a little bit boring. I'm not a huge classics fan. Dracula was far more, I will review that later, far more entertaining than this. But Frankenstein it's interesting. I do not recommend it for anybody under maybe high school, 9th grade. Otherwise, one, they'll probably be a little bit bored by it, and two, it probably slightly goes over their heads with what this is. So if you're not familiar with the basic story of Frankenstein, you have a man by the name of Victor Frankenstein. He's an aristocrat, I believe in Geneva. So he has two younger brothers and an adoptive sister. His mother dies right before he goes off to university. It stalls him. He goes off to university, becomes obsessed. He basically becomes a massive, massive workaholic, and he becomes obsessed with the creation of life. And then he creates some. So yes, he basically creates the monster, the Frankenstein's monster. A lot of people mistake. They frequently call the monster Frankenstein, but no, Frankenstein's the surname of Victor Frankenstein, the creator. He creates this life out of cadavers and then proceeds to run away and try to forget it. Basically tries to forget his creation exists. He gets sick. He gets found by a friend. He's nursed back to health. He eventually tries to forget this thing exists until both his baby brother and then his sister are killed. And then it shows up and it's like, hi, I'm pissed off because you kind of abandoned me and I'm a monster and my life sucks. So the monster then proceeds to tell him, Victor Frankenstein, what happened after he ran away. So the monster stayed in the guy's apartment for a while, realizes, okay, my master is not, my creator is not coming back. He leaves. Eventually he's going through the woods. He finds essentially a lean-to, a little hovel behind a cottage. So he starts living in there and listening to the family and learning from the family that's living in there. And it was a former French aristocratic family that fell afoul of the revolution. You have a father, a sister, and the son. And at the time around the time his father ended up falling from grace because of one of the French revolutions, he was engaged to a Turkish girl. And I think him and his father were making this deal for him to marry this Turkish girl whom he had met. I believe they had written letters back and forth. She was in love with him. She eventually finds out where he is because her father is pretty much like, okay, this guy doesn't have any money anymore. There's no point in me marrying my daughter off to him, and I'm going to bomb the moose. Well, she leaves her father, eventually gets to the family, and they become happier. But now the old man, so the son has his wife now, his father and his sister. The father is blind. And he eventually talks to the monster, but then the rest of the family find out. They see him because they're not blind and chase him away. And they want nothing to do with it. They're terrified. They realize this thing is some unholy creature that's huge and misshapen, and it's a monster. Now, prior to this, he learned all about breeding and the world and life from this family. And so he's pissed off. He's heartbroken. He now has to go and find his creator because he's alone. And he doesn't want to be alone. He wants Frankenstein to create him a bride. So he does not have to be alone. Unfortunately, he kind of kills both the sister and the little brother in his rage before this. So Frankenstein, in order to be left alone, decides, okay, he's going to concede to his creation's wishes and to create a female, which he eventually abandons because it's a horrible thing and he wants nothing to do with this monster. And he tries to run away and go on with his life, and basically the monster follows him and kills everything. Kills his father, kills his fiance, kills his best friend. Pretty much anything that Victor Frankenstein loves, that monster kills in his own rage because he is alone. And Frankenstein will not basically remedy that situation. And all of this is being told, which a lot of people seem to forget about this story. It's told through the lens of Frankenstein is telling his story to the captain of this ship, who's basically, they're stuck in the ice. They find Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein, pretty much near death. He's running through the, I believe it's the Arctic or the Antarctic. It's the northern area, I think past Scotland. Can't remember exactly where it was. I'm not sure it's clear where it is because the guy's English. The captain of the ship is English, and they're stuck in the ice. And they find Frankenstein on basically a sled. His sled dogs, I think, have all died at this point. He's about to die himself. They nurse him back to health to an extent. He does end up dying. But he basically tells this story to this explorer who's trying to, either he's trying to find the Northwest Passage, or he's going basically into the Arctic, into the North Arctic. He's the explorer, which is that it fits the time period when Mary Shelley wrote this book. It's the age of exploration. So that's the framing device for this story. So Frankenstein tells his entire life story and why he's essentially running. He's trying to kill the monster, essentially. He's fleeing everything, basically trying to get away. And so Frankenstein dies. This guy's stuck in the ice. Eventually he's faced mutiny, and they're like, when we get the heck out of this ice, we want to go home. And I think Victor Frankenstein tells them off when they do this. And yet the captain eventually agrees. Like, yeah, when we get out of the ice, as much as I'm going to go home in disgrace, I don't want to face mutiny because my crew is saying, we want to go bloody damn go home because we don't want to die. Which kind of makes sense. You don't blame them. They don't care about glory or honor or anything. They just don't want to die. Makes it a little bit more common sense here. Victor Frankenstein dies on the boat after telling his story, and the captain has written it all down, and then Frankenstein kind of edits and helps a little bit, and then dies, and then the monster shows up as they're going to bury him. And it's like, yeah. And then pretty much it's like, he's evil. I did all of this. You've heard his story. And then he basically goes off, and it's kind of left open-ended where I'm assuming the monster eventually dies. Because everything he has is gone, because he's destroyed everything that Victor Frankenstein loved, and Frankenstein never created him a partner for life. And that's essentially the end of the story. The captain, the ice breaks, and they go home. And that's kind of the end of this story. It's a little boring. It's a little interesting. It's very much a biography kind of thing. It's not very long. I just kind of found it dragged in places. So, because it's a classical work, and again, it's very much Victor Frankenstein's life. And it is a tragic story. It's not really about the monster so much as a man who basically, you become a massive workaholic. You finally achieve what you're looking for, only you lose everything in the process. The story is called Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, because Victor Frankenstein creates life off the Greek or Roman myth of Prometheus, who I believe gives man fire or creates humans. So it is very much a cautionary tale in many respects during a time of the great age of exploration. It's essentially, be careful what you wish for. You may just get it. It may not be what you're looking for. And also, don't play God. Don't make life if you don't know what the heck you're doing. Also understand, during this time period, this is the early ages of, and this is where Shelley's coming from, where they're starting to do dissections. So they're slowly discovering anatomy. And this is the early ages of it. This is also around the same time as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are written, which is loosely based on some interesting body snatching going down in Edinburgh in Scotland, because that was one of the premier medical schools. And also this is the time the primary places where you would get bodies were hard to come by, because not a lot of people, being very, very Christian, wanted to donate their bodies to science. So mostly it was criminals. Occasionally people would donate their bodies, but mostly it was criminals or murder victims that were dissected. So that's where Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde came off, or it was off an actual story of Burke and Hare, who were notorious body snatchers and then ended up killing people. But this was around the same time period. So it was the dawn of the age of exploration and the age of science, where chemistry was taking over for alchemy. And that's the world that Mary Shelley lived in. So that's where she was taking off. This story came from. This was the world that she was living in. And you're still having those battles with the French Revolution between religion and the old ways, and the new ways are still pretty much battling each other at this point in history. It's also getting close to the dawn of the Industrial Age. So that's kind of the background of what Shelley was coming from. She also had a very, very tragic life. But so you have this story, it's very dark. There's a lot of layers to it. And with a toddler, I don't have time to digest them, and I would have loved to take a lit class. I would love to have been a lit minor. Instead, my counselor convinced 20-something-year-old me to be an anthropology minor, because apparently I wouldn't be able to pass the grammar and rhetoric class because of where I went to high school. Yeah, what you can be convinced for when you're unassertive 20-something. But that's neither here nor there. But this is an interesting story. Again, I found it a little dragged in places, but it's not that long. It's one of your typical it's a science fiction more than a horror film book. As opposed to Dracula, which is very much the action, at least a little bit of action, mystery horror. This is mostly science fiction, if you're really looking at it. It's very, very science fiction mixed with a revenge story. And again, the moral of be careful with you fish were and don't play God, because you're going to run into trouble. And that's, of course, why you get the framing device. Is essentially it's a cautionary tale. Frankenstein's tale, it's like, one, he will not tell the captain how he did it, because it's like, no, absolutely not. I recognize you. You're similar to when I was young. I'm not going to let you go down this path because you're obsessed with exploration and knowledge and take it too far. And that's what Frankenstein did. That's kind of the moral of the story, is they took knowledge and took it too far. In fact, in that sense, the message is very similar to Jurassic Park, the book, not the film. I may cover those. They're probably somewhat appropriate for this channel. But essentially, don't mess with nature. It never turns out well. It just doesn't. But this is, again, you don't want to read this to the younger kids, because one, they're not going to get it. And two, it's probably going to bore them, because it's pretty much somebody's life story. So most kids that younger than high school they're not going to comprehend this. And they may be able to read it, but I'm not sure how much they're going to get out of it. But of course, it depends on the parents. You can judge for yourself the maturity of your child. It's not so much the intelligence, it's the emotional maturity of kids that young. They're just not there yet. High school students may get it. I think the older you get, that's the reason it's normally done in high school. But again, they may not. It depends on your kid. I found it, like I said, I found it dragged a little bit. It's kind of interesting. I did find myself skipping through it a little bit, but that's also because I'm dyslexic and I have a toddler and I have stuff to do. So this wasn't the most interesting books, but I wanted to cover it because it's a classic and I wanted to read it because I hadn't before. And it's interesting. I mean, it's an interesting look at the cautionary tale of what happens when you become so obsessed with your work that you don't realize what the heck you're doing. And then it comes and bites you. In this case, it pretty much destroys Victor Frankenstein's life because he creates a monster that just wanted life. that wanted to have a normal life, so he didn't want to be alone. So you created a monster that became angry because he was lonely. I mean, that's the bottom line. The monster isn't essentially evil. Frankenstein created him that way because he created a living being and he didn't take responsibility for it. And it ran amok because it was lonely and it was in a world that it didn't belong in because it was an abomination. It was created from cadavers. It was larger than normal humans at the time, and it was pieced together. So, and therefore it was an abomination because it was born, not made, in a world that wasn't quite ready for that kind of thing. I don't think the world is still quite ready for that kind of thing. Reanimated corpses has a tendency to scare people. That's all the obsession with zombies. But that's it that I can. There's not much I can say. There's a lot of people. This is covered like crazy. It's Frankenstein, for God's sake. People have analyzed this book to death over decades. It's the reason it's still in print. I mean, it was a short story written on during a writing contest with Mary Shelley, her husband, and why can I not remember his name? He's extremely Lord Byron, who was another famous author and did a lot of very interesting men, as was Percy Shelley. So that's what this was. I mean, it was something she wrote. She did write a few other things, but she also had an extremely tragic life. But that was Mary Shelley. And people have digested this to death. This is just kind of my brief little opinion. I'll say again, not really younger than high school. It might be good if you're doing unit studies looking at either science fiction or anatomy, or maybe the human condition. I know the monster reads Paradise Lost in this book, so it depends on what you're looking for. This is a classic. It's probably one of the first science fiction tales, because again, around the time period, it was the dawn of modern science as we know it today, and the slowly moving away from alchemy, which was the science almost of the past. Besides, let's all create the Philosopher's Stone and create the elixir of life and turn base metals into gold. Yeah, no, J.K. Rowling was not coming. That did not come out of left field. She did not make that up. The Philosopher's Stone was well known and constantly sought after, including by people like Isaac Newton, who slowly went crazy. A lot of them slowly went crazy. That's what happens when you mess around with chemicals and liquid mercury. You slowly go crazy. And yeah, it was the time. That was around the time that Frankenstein was written. So it's a good book. Would recommend it if you're looking at things like anatomy. If you have kids who are really, really interested in science fiction, this is the beginning of it. I mean, she's literally considered one of the modern creators of science fiction. So it's a good book to look at. It's a good book to analyze. There's a lot of things you can go into with this. There's a lot of layers to it that I'm not going to go into because I don't have that background. And I don't have the time to go looking into the layers, and I'm sure there's dozens of people who can do it a heck of a lot better than I can, because they have backgrounds in English literature and books like this. So that is it for this review. I am covering my Harry Potter reviews are still going on through the rest of October. Dracula is going to come up soon, which is, in my opinion, a better book, far more interesting. And as well as the Phantom of the Opera, which is also interesting. Those are coming up. A couple more other things going on in October, a few more films if you want to check those out. As I said, the rest of my Harry Potter reviews that started back in September should be finishing up by the end of October here into November. I'm going to be covering some Native American stuff, looking at some databases, and looking at some children's books, focusing on children. And then all of December is just fun stuff. It's just classic, secular, non-religious Christmas films and children's books. If you want to check out the rest of it, I have a bunch of other book reviews. I have some film reviews, a sprinkling of homeschooling reviews, and a few travel reviews that have been posted. So if you would like to, like and subscribe. And that is it for this review. Thank you.